So if you are of Italian origin and you are looking to get Italian citizenship by descent, then you need to watch this video. So in today's video, I'm going to explain exactly what happened, who's affected, and what you can still do. Also, later on in the video, I'm going to present a few scenarios which may help you to get around this new law. Needless to say, it was easier before. Italy did not present any generational limits, and in theory, you could inherit your Italian passport from a parent, grandparent, great-grandparent, even great-great-grandparent, as long as you were able to provide the correct documentation. It didn't matter where you were born. The most important thing was that you had Italian origins and you were able to prove them. I did this myself. I was able to get my Italian passport via my great-grandfather, my father's paternal grandfather. The biggest change now is that there is a generational limit. You can only go back as far as your parents' generation or your grandparents. Put in simple terms, this current Italian government is looking to grant citizenship to people who have a real living and more recent connection to this country. Now, getting back to this new law, it states that you are not Italian if you were born outside of Italy and you possess another citizenship which is not Italian. So in other words, if you're a person like me, who was not born in Italy and you possess a US passport, for example, you're not considered Italian unless you meet the following criteria. So the first one are people that already have Italian citizenship who did the jus sanguinis like I did back in 2008, so I'm covered. So if any of you had this process done before the March 28th cutoff date of this year, then you are set. You do, however, have to maintain ties with this country, but from what I understand, that's actually not very hard to do. So this can be done by renewing your passport, voting from abroad, etc., etc. The next scenario is this. If you have already filed an application with an Italian consulate before March 27th, 2025 at 11:59 p.m., then the consulates will still operate under the old citizenship laws. The next category are parents. And in this situation, there are two different scenarios. So the first one is if you have a parent that was born in Italy. This is probably, I think, one of the easiest ways to gain Italian citizenship. But even in this situation, you have to have a parent that was born in Italy and was an Italian citizen at the time of your birth. So even if you're born abroad, but you have an Italian parent that was born here, then there's no question about that. You are an Italian citizen. Evviva. Oh, an important detail, this also applies to adoptive parents. Now, the other parent scenario is a little more specific, but this would actually apply to me. So let's look at my scenario. I'm an Italian citizen, dual Italian citizen actually, dual American. I acquired my Italian citizenship in 2008, so like I said before, I am covered under the new law. My daughter was born here, so she got Italian citizenship via her mother automatically. Technically, she got it from both of us because we're both Italian citizens. But if I were not an Italian citizen, then she would get it from her mother because her mother was born here. Because Italy is not like the United States. If you're born here, you're not automatically an Italian citizen. Now, let's suppose I move back to the United States and I have another child who was born in America. Would my child be considered an Italian citizen? The answer is yes. So according to the new law, parents that were not born in Italy and who wish to pass on their Italian citizenship to their children, there are two situations or two criteria that must be met.
So the first one is you must have lived in Italy for 3 years prior to the birth of your child, and this could be any 3 years before. And the other one is that you must be an Italian citizen at the time of birth of your child.
The next scenario is if you have an Italian grandparent that was born in this country. Now in this scenario, all you need is an Italian grandparent that was born in this country and retained their Italian citizenship their whole lives. Now for a bit of context, let's talk about my aunt. My aunt, who is my father's sister, she does qualify. She does it because she would be able to get her Italian citizenship through her grandfather, who was my great-grandfather. And this is so because he was only an Italian citizen throughout his entire life. As a matter of fact, this was what helped me to get my citizenship. Now, this person was her paternal grandfather, so like I said, she'd be able to get it through him, but she could not get it through her maternal grandfather. And the reason why is because he later became a US citizen, and this happened before she was born, so no, that path would be invalid. One important detail is that even if my aunt today were to go to the Italian consulate and apply to become an Italian citizen, she would get it, but her children would not get it. Because in this situation, when you have a parent that was born abroad, but even though they qualified to be an Italian citizen, she cannot pass it on to their children because her children are over age 21. This only applies if you have young children. So this is another nuance to this new law. Now keep in mind that what I've just described applies to grandparents who are deceased. But what if you have a living grandparent? If that's the case, then you need to be sure that at the time of your birth that your grandparent was still an Italian citizen and only an Italian citizen when you were born. (1948), yeah. Now, as some of you may have noticed, in this picture, I did not point to my great-grandmother, and there's a very specific reason why. Prior to 1948, women in this country, Italy, could not legally pass on their citizenship to their children. So to give you a more tangible idea of what that looks like, let's take my great-grandmother for example. So she was born in Italy, and my grandmother was born in 1921. So what that means is that at the time of birth of my grandmother, she was not legally able to pass on her citizenship. By now, I think we're starting to see a pattern. What this new Italian law wants, and even the old one, they want people that were Italian citizens at the time of birth of their children. They want that living connection. One more note on the 1948 scenario. This seems to be a gray area in terms of acquiring Italian citizenship. And from what I've seen throughout the years, people have actually been able to challenge this ruling. So in essence, what they do is they sue the Italian state, and they just simply say that they want to acquire Italian citizenship regardless of this law. And I actually have seen people that have won. In fact, one of my subscribers did that actually a number of years ago. So there is hope. Small disclaimer. So this is a relatively new law. It came out in March of this year, and I have been studying it ever since. And just know that the information that I have presented in this video is my interpretation of this new law. What are your thoughts on this particular reform? Are you for it? Are you against it? Let me know what you think. Now, if you do qualify, you might be asking yourself, what documentation do I need? This is actually the same as before the law changed. So you will need, and I like to call these pertinent life documents. This means your birth certificate, your parents' marriage certificate, your marriage certificate if that applies, death obviously if that applies. Also, please be aware that any documents that are not from Italy need to be translated into Italian, and you also need an apostille, which is an international notary stamp. Also, if there were any name changes, then you need to show proof that you are connected to your Italian parent or your Italian grandparent. Also, if your grandparent or parent naturalized, then you will need your naturalization certificate. This obviously applies to people who are from the United States. Also, you also need a letter that indicates that they were never a citizen. So this is exactly what I did. I wrote to Homeland Security. I asked them to do a search of my great-grandfather, and about 9 months later, I got a letter back that said that they had no proof of his existence. So that means that he was an Italian citizen still. Where can you apply? Well, fortunately, you can still apply at the consulate, which is what I did. I went to the consulate in New York. You can also apply in Italy. Now, I think less people do this, and the reason why is because, while it is possible, you would need to come here and establish residency. That's not difficult, but in order to do that, you need to either buy property or you need to get the permission of a property owner to establish residency there. And I'm not sure people would be willing to do that because this might add, it might add more to their taxes, for example. Now let's talk about what happens if you do not meet these new requirements, but you still want to become an Italian citizen. Fortunately, there are ways that you can do it. In this scenario, you would not be getting Italian citizenship via descent, but you would be getting it through earned efforts. Now, one possible path to citizenship would be via naturalization. So if you want to come and live here and establish residency, and if you have no Italian ancestry, if you're not an EU citizen, then you would need to wait 10 years. It's a bit extensive, I know, but unfortunately that's the current law. Now let's talk about the scenario that I was mentioning before. The one where you have an Italian parent who was born abroad, not born in Italy, however, at the time of your birth, was an Italian citizen, but did not live for 2 years prior to your birth. So in order to make up for those 2 years, you, the child of an Italian parent, not born in this country, you would need to serve those 2 years by coming and living in Italy. Now in this last scenario, we're talking about people that have Italian ancestry. Italian ancestry. I wonder, does this apply to people that have great-grandparents who were Italian citizens? Ladies and gentlemen, if I've understood this new law correctly, this might be a way for you to obtain Italian citizenship if you only have a great-grandparent who is an Italian citizen. The only difference here is that you would not be getting it via jus sanguinis, via a birthright, but you would be getting this via naturalization. In this case, the semantics are important. So after filming this video, I realized that there was already an update worth mentioning. So in the citizenship law, there is a deposition, or line if you will, like a part of the law, which aims to help people of Italian descent have their citizenship birthright recognized based on the country where they're from. Now, I should mention that the final decree has not been approved yet, but really it's only a matter of time. So how does it work? Or better yet, how will it work? Well, in essence, the Italian government has decided to take into account the countries which saw the largest number of Italian immigrants in the last century. The top four would be Brazil, Argentina, the United States, and Australia. I imagine they have taken into account these countries because if you have a population which has a large number of people of Italian descent, then they're more likely than other countries to have an interest in coming back to Italy, and they may have more of a living connection. A bit of context before I go on. So in order to work legally in Italy, anybody would need the permesso di soggiorno. In essence, this is the visa that you need in order to be legal here. Each year, the Italian government has a specific number of permessi di soggiorno that they're allowed to give out. In this situation, if you are of Italian descent and if you meet certain conditions, then your ancestry will help you to bypass these quotas. Now, at this point, if a person from one of these countries is willing to come and live in Italy for 2 years, and if they have a legal work contract, then the Italian government would make it easier for them to get a permesso di soggiorno just based on their ancestry and also other conditions. In other words, this specific condition allows a potential citizenship candidate to bypass the specific number of visas the government allots every year. So for example, if the government is only allowed 5,000 visas for US citizens, then you would not fall into this number. It wouldn't matter. In theory, this could be a way to get around this new law and acquire your Italian passport via a great-grandparent. If that's true, then, and if you're willing to come and live here, then it is a possibility. Now, for anybody who wants to become an Italian citizen via naturalization, in the cases that I've just mentioned, there are conditions that apply to anybody. And these are, you do have to demonstrate a B1, an intermediate level of Italian. You need to have a clean criminal record, and I believe you also need to present a source of income. In other words, they want people who are established members of the society. If you are serious about moving to Italy and you're looking for some good tips on how to do that, then do check out the playlist that you're seeing on the screen right now. As always, grazie mille per l'attenzione. Ci vediamo alla prossima. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video.